welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week we are pretty much indulging me because we watched The Iron Giant, which, if you know me at all, you probably know that is one of my all-time favorite movies. Easily top 5, probably top 3. So, fair warning, I'm probably not going to have anything bad to say about this movie. I love it so very much. It's so fucking good.
Well, Sean, I have no particular nostalgia for The Iron Giant. I came to this movie completely objectively, 100% unbiased opinion, not opinion, fact, and I have to say that looking at this movie now, in the year of our Lord, 2018, it's extremely fun and charming, and I loved it, and it made me cry.
And that's The Iron Giant. It's so good. It's so good. If you guys... I've actually stopped doing this as much. I don't know if our eagle-eyed ear listeners might have noticed that I've not said it's so good, go watch it in many episodes, and I'm very proud of that fact. But I'm going to do it right now because it's so good. It's so good. If you have not watched The Iron Giant, I beg of you, with all of my heart, please go watch The Iron Giant. This is one that everyone should see. It is so fucking good.
It's a legit classic. If you have not seen it and were maybe worried that this was one of those cases of, people's nostalgia making the movie better than it is, I promise you this is not the case. Because I did watch The Iron Giant when I was a kid in pieces. I remember it would play on cable a lot, and I would catch it at certain parts. So I don't think I had ever just, sat through the entire movie on its own until a few months ago.
Whoa, I made you watch it freshman year.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. I bought it from fucking Target or some shit like that.
Oh, yeah! That is where I had seen it. I thought I had seen it one more time since I was a kid. Okay, yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, it's great. God, anyway, so I guess my brain continues to fail me. So I probably did watch The Iron Giant all the way through as a kid, and now I cannot remember because the human mind is a labyrinth of failure and pain.
This has been Jackson's Positivity Corner. Please join us next week as we continue to debate our own existentialism and wonder why. Why, God, why?
I was gonna try and jump in with that stupid Jaden Smith Mirrors quote, but I forgot exactly how it went and realized that if I got it wrong, it wouldn't be funny. So now there's just this explanation where a joke should be. And
you know what? Someone might find that funny. I'm not that person, but someone might find it funny. So I guess let's talk about The Iron Giant.
Spoilers. Everybody's gonna do spoilers. I feel like everyone knows how this movie ends, but spoilers anyway.
If you haven't seen it, I don't know what to tell you. You've wasted your life up to this point. So spoilers, absolutely, because you shouldn't listen to this podcast if you don't know how The Iron Giant ends. You're a fool. You're a fool. Go watch the fucking movie. Hard stance. Go watch The Iron Giant. So yeah, spoilers. It's the best fucking movie in the world.
Second only to Ready Player One, where his appearance there really embodies the spirit of the character and the gentle soul at the heart of The Iron Giant.
I don't remember if I got mad at Ready Player One for The Iron Giant on podcast. I know I did everywhere else, but I don't remember if it was on the podcast. Yeah, I'm really mad at that movie for that because, the whole theme of this movie is you can choose who you want to be, and he chooses not to be a gun. So my favorite part was when the Iron Giant shot that other guy, and then he punched him
shot
in the face.
Mechagodzilla, I believe.
Yeah, Iron Giant does.
I'm pretty sure I'm being a total hypocrite here because I'm pretty sure I made a thing about how I was tired of everyone making the same I am not a gun joke about the Iron Giant, but I bring it up here just because I think it's a good indicator of how effective this movie is at characterizing the Giant, first of all, not just in his like ultimate sort of like pacifist, like sweet boy philosophy, but just in his like small mannerisms. Like, you could take every other element of the scene out, take everything else, just cut it out, have a black screen with only the Giant in there, and the movie would still be a blast to watch, just from all the little like subtleties in his movement and all the cute little faces that he makes when he's like confused or distressed, or his adorable little smile. The Iron Giant is the cutest character of all time, I think.
And, you know, the fact that he's played by Vin Diesel really only accentuates that fact.
It really does. Like, I honestly forgot about that. But it's just it hits that perfect pitch of still being like intimidating, and this works really well when like the story has to shift when the Giant goes into like planet destroyer like weapon mode, when his old self is like triggered, because there are scenes, even when he is acting cute and being endearing, like there are scenes where there is sort of this tension hanging in the air, that like, you know, he is also in theory like as tough and dangerous and big as he seems. It's just that he's such a sweetheart that he wouldn't act on it of his own accord. But even in like scenes where it's not, obviously we get those moments where like his eyes turn red and like he's being attacked, and like then he makes his like transformation into weapons mode. Like, there's all that. But even in just some of the scenes where Hogarth is just playing around on him, like he can kind of like feel the weight in how easily he could just crush him even on accident.
Oh yeah, there's the whole scene with where Hogarth uses him essentially as a giant carousel and has him pick him up in a car and just flies him. And like, as an adult, I'm watching this scene thinking, oh my god, Hogarth is dead.
Oh my god, man, my stomach turned, like, even ignoring how like physics works, like, and how like his insides would be like liquefied. Like, I'm just sitting there thinking like, oh god, like he's gonna go like flying or something horrible's gonna happen, like stop.
Especially because like 2 scenes prior we had just seen the Iron Giant chuck a car a good distance.
To say the least. That car went blasting off again.
It's such a great scene.
You know, it's wonderful. And I think that the Giant himself is such a well realized and understated character, just because I think it's interesting the way the human characters end up being portrayed. They're all pretty quirky in their own way, except for maybe his mom. His mom's a little bit more down to earth, whereas like Dean's got kind of like that whole beatnik thing going on. And the first time we see him is with the squirrel diner scene, where his cool facade is like tested and then like unbuttoned completely.
As literal as possible.
In the most literal fashion. And then, Hogarth, of course, is like super quirky, and like, yeah, the characters, they're not, they're definitely not one-dimensional. Even Mansley, who, is our bad guy, basically, like, even he's got some dimensions to him as sort of the symbol of, like, the American, like, fear-mongering establishment. Like, his beliefs and philosophy like feel very real in the context of the whole Cold War thing, but I don't know what it is, but like just the fact that in a way they're still kind of larger than life and animated and caricatured makes the Giant feel almost almost more understated and human than the human characters do to me, weirdly enough.
Well, I think a lot of this too, it just has to do with like I've seen this movie a lot. Like, in case it's not clear, I really like it. What a shock. But like I was really watching small things this time, just little things to see what I could pick up on, and I think a lot of the little things that might go entirely unnoticed to someone who's watching this for the first time really does help explain why the giant is so, cuddly in a way, and why all of these characters work in such a beautiful way, and why you never really question a lot of the logic in the movie is because it sets up so much so nicely. Like, for example, the first time you see the Iron Giant, he is incredibly stiff and mechanical. Like, all of his movements are very jerky and deliberate and movement, and like it's subtle, but it's definitely there. And then like as it goes on, you see him start to fluid up a little bit, get a little bit more loose and more humanized in that way. And like it's just little things like that that really show what the movie is doing. And like beyond that, at one point while I was watching it, I thought, man, this would never work today. But I wouldn't have thought that had I not noticed that the whole movie is set up to make sure that you don't think about the fact that it would never work today, because everything about it reminds you of the 50s, reminds you of that era. Like, even down to, they have walking music. Like, as they're walking, Hogarth is like a whip, 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 and the giant is a much deeper, like, boom, 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 with each step. And it's so charming. It's so reminiscent of that era of animation. It brings you right back. You never think, boy, if they had a cell phone or better radio detection, this never would have happened or anything like that. There's just so many little things about this movie that just make it so wonderful.
You mentioning the period piece aspects also got me thinking just how interesting it is to me that this movie combines traditional animation and like CGI so well, and how it sort of ends up standing out as being like, from the 90s in that way. Like that was very, using those kinds of deliberate like CGI moments. It would have been just like a stylistic choice back then, but now it feels like a stylistic choice tied to a particular time. I don't want to say it is dated, because it doesn't feel that dated to me. Like obviously like some of the like compositing between the backgrounds of the giants hasn't aged like completely flawlessly, but overall I think the effect of having the otherworldly mechanical being be a model and everything else be distinctly like hand drawn, in addition to the period piece elements, I think really helps give this movie a very unique feel from other animated movies.
It definitely brings the giant out and gives him that understanding that he is, not supposed to be there, that it is something out of the ordinary. And I don't know whether it was just the fact that I was watching like the Blu-ray signature edition and they did blending better or whatnot, but like a lot of time I would kind of forget that he was separate, and like occasionally be like, oh wow, he looks a little bit different in this scene. But like I was definitely picking up that they were different animation styles. It blends very well and very fluidly, which is like, even though it was a very element of the time, it stands out as very effective. Like I've seen a lot of movies, I've watched a lot of like movies from the 90s recently where I'm like, wow, this looks awful, and I can clearly see where it was, animated versus CG'd, and it looks bad and it's disorienting. But in this movie it feels just so incredibly natural, and like they utilize that in an incredibly effective manner. It's not just a matter of we had to do this to make it easier. It was, we're doing this intentionally to create this feeling of otherworldliness, and it's beautiful. It works just wonders.
Yeah, I think going along with this idea of like time and place, I was thinking about the 50 setting a lot, because it it's brought to life very well, and not just in like replicating some elements of like 50s animation, but also how they'll take like they'll animate sections of television, like emulate like trashy 50s B sci-fi films and like talk shows, and just it's all very very true to the cultural idea of the 50s and the way the like pop culture of the 50s was. But I think what was interesting to me about the Cold War setting and like Mansley as a character and this fear of this sort of protectionism, this isolationism, like we gotta be ready for all threats, this militarism. I couldn't help but think about Brad Bird, the director, and how and I hate to like completely derail the whole conversation with a conversation about the director's politics, especially because I don't think they've been confirmed, but like especially with Tomorrowland and like some of his more like recent movies, it's very obvious that Brad Bird has an affinity for like Ayn Rand and kind of objectivist ideals, which I thought I think, and it may sound like I'm criticizing him for that here, but what I think it does, if that is true, if I do have my understanding of like this director's body of work correctly, I think it gives him a particular perspective on portraying this time, on portraying the Cold War, and really capturing what would be the craziness of the whole like government system, of the whole East versus West thing, the militarism. I think that by having an outlook, at least again as a director thematically, so rooted in individualism, I think that it really plays to his strengths as a director here, and how that element of fear is something that ends up being a driving force of the movie, something that we have all seen and that we all understand is like ridiculous. And so I think it's easy, because even though it is a kids movie, with the Cold War elements, it's more inherently political than a lot of other kids movies, and I think it does a good job of creating that atmosphere without like bringing along a lot of baggage that maybe other attempts to do so may or may not have pulled off, like cough cough Tomorrowland. But yeah, I don't know. I thought the fact that it really went for it. It really went for it on the period piece setting, and it's not like you said. This couldn't have taken place at any other time, and you never find yourself thinking like, oh, like what would a modern like update of the Iron Giant look like? Because it's so rooted in that. Even though the themes of like fear mongering and like militarism are still very much applicable today. Like that specific backdrop, I think, is what really makes the movie what it is.
For sure, and I think it really speaks to the movie that you get kind of two very different viewpoints of the movie depending on your age in a lot of ways. Just like you and I watch this going, oh wow, this is during the Red Scare, which, informs a lot of Mansley's decisions and kind of creates a whole different dynamic for a lot of the characters and whatnot that's really interesting. So as a kid, I kind of took away you shouldn't kill something just because you don't know what it is type of deal. But like now there's a whole different set of baggage with it, just given that it's a whole Cold War theme. You have, now that I understand it, like there's a whole level of like, well, could Mansley theoretically have been right in this situation? I mean, like, when everyone's already paranoid and terrified of everything, there's bound to be people that would see it that way. And it's just a very different, interesting perspective 20 or some years later.
You mentioning that also reminds me of another thing that I appreciate about this movie is that the adult characters, aside from Mansley, all act pretty reasonably and pretty rationally given the situation. It's not like rationality is not something I've placed a super high priority on in a movie, but I'm thinking particularly of the moments where like the giant runs away and like he Hogarth accidentally sort of triggers his defense mechanisms with the ray gun, and how Dean is like protecting him, like, no, stay away, like he's dangerous, and sort of like scolding the giant, like, distrusting him again. But he doesn't spend the rest of the movie or any significant amount of time like still hating him or still holding a grudge for that scene. Once Dean understands like why he did that, like why it happened that way, like he's immediately like, oh shit, like this is just like an unfortunate thing. Like he treats it with the gravity that it deserves, that it's still a problem that could escalate and get out of hand, but it's not a case where we have like half an hour of the movie dedicated to like, it's not like a Man of Steel, like where the movie is all like we don't trust you, like you're dangerous, and for all these reasons. I mean, and I guess speaking of Superman, like Man of Steel is a good point of comparison, if only because this movie is like the anti Man of Steel.
Which is just that it's more like Superman.
It's more like Superman, but they do, weirdly enough, like they do touch on those same themes. And I guess like, Superman's a character with such a long history that this could apply to other incarnations that I'm less familiar with as well. But the whole like distrusting the outsider and like grappling with like a legacy of how in Man of Steel, like Krypton was like a colonialist planet that was doing horrible things, and how the giant is sort of the whole point of his character is trying to choose his own fate and not be who he's supposed to be.
Well, I'm pretty sure the director of Man of Steel actually has similar Randian politics, so it kind of tracks very well.
Yeah, no, that, totally. I was just like that's a really good point too. I mean, just look at you can find so many people dissecting Zack Snyder's films through that lens, but I think like this movie gets what makes you emotionally involved in a character, and that's making them a human being. The Iron Giant may be made of metal, but he's 1,000 times more human than the DC Universe's version of Superman could ever be.
And like that culminates because we spend the entire movie getting to know the Iron Giant. We watch him react to situations. We see little minutia of him changing to certain situations, variations on how he moves, how he reacts, his learning to speak throughout the entire time frame. It's not just here's a character, now he's Superman. He does things. We watch him learn, we watch him grow, we watch him figure out what he wants to be, and what he wants to be is Superman. Unlike Man of Steel, where it just kind of feels like it culminates in him being an angry Superman anyway, for reasons.
Oh no, you know what I just realized is maybe an even better point of comparison? This movie is basically Chappie, but not stupid.
Okay. I have not seen Chappie, so
Chappie basically is this movie, but stupid. Yeah, they tried this. Chappie tries the same thing, and I think it really. I only bring up Chappie because I think it's a miracle that the Giant as character works as well as he does. Because Chappie tries a lot of the same stuff to make the central robot character kind of quirky and likable and cute. Except in Chappie, it falls completely flat, and the attempts to give him depth. It's even the same message about like pacifism and violence, except in Chappie, since Neil Blomkamp can't resist his like hard R like gore spectacle for his supposedly sweet little robot movie, it ends up playing as like completely psychotic.
Jesus, I'm trying to put like the Iron Giant in the situation of a hard R movie, and I just cannot reconcile with that.
well then, my friend, you gotta watch Chappie, because that's basically what it is. Chappie is like the least likable little shit there's ever been. Like, he just sort of cowers and like acts like a baby the whole time. Whereas the Iron Giant is more like a big, lovable dog. He's got that kind of temperament. He even does like the dog like head tilt at the beginning when he's like watching Hogarth go away. It's wonderful. Yeah. So if you want a case study in how to make a non-human character feel as real and important to us as like a human character, watch the Iron Giant. If you want to see them fuck the exact same concept up completely, watch Chappie, except maybe don't, and save yourself 2.5 hours.
So what if, interesting question, it's just Vin Diesel? Because, so we have the Iron Giant, who ends up being a very human, very fun character, and then 15 years later, he does Groot, which ends up being a very human, very fun character in the exact same way. Is Vin Diesel just really good at doing self-sacrificing inhuman characters?
I mean, there's no way that isn't part of it, just because of how well that same magic struck twice. And in fact, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the experience of being the Iron Giant informed his experience of being Groot. With Groot, it's even more stripped down. He's got to convey all of that just through the same 3 words, but in different inflections, like over and over again. So really, yeah, in order to make that work, it takes a particular talent to do that. So yeah, I think Vin Diesel is a big part of it.
Props to Vin Diesel, I suppose.
Well, if it seems like we're a little bit all over the place with this episode, I think one of the reasons that ends up happening is that as far as deaths go, like literal deaths, like we can talk about the feelings, this idea of fear, whether it's the giant like even hurting Hogarth even on accident, or the very literal fear of Mansley and the Red Scare, etc. And that's all like a key component to the story, of course. But as far as like literal deaths go, the problem with trying to talk about this movie is that it basically, whenever the movie does engage in actual death, it engages in it in pretty much the same way. But that's not a knock on the movie, because it's all leading up to that ending, which is just a fucking killer every single time. Like the scene with the deer, the scene where the giant is learning what death is.
Talk about like introducing existentialism to like a fucking 12-year-old.
I know, and like, because people will talk about their first experience with death in a movie. Like, they'll talk about like The Lion King. Like, people our age, that's an example for a lot of people. Like, they were traumatized when Mufasa died. Or for people who are a little older, like when Optimus Prime dies in the Transformers movie. But the deer introduces death in so much more of a natural and like realistic way, and Hogarth's way of explaining it to the giant like feels very much how you would explain it to a child, except it's also a child explaining it to another child. And
a child explaining it to a 100-foot tall metallic child.
Yes. And then there's even the I mean, this was pointed out to me by my girlfriend who was watching with me at the time, how like the deer, like they're sort of playing with it, interacting with it, and then it gets shot by the hunters, and when they see the giant, they're the ones doing the killing, but they're the ones who end up running away. And isn't that just sort of fucked on its own? And so yeah, it's just this really great little microcosm of a scene with like surprisingly a lot going on that like that they'll sort of continue to think about and expand upon like later. The whole idea of like the gun and whether the giant is a gun, and then it just ends up being the perfect setup to that payoff. Like the saddest scene in the movie to me isn't when the giant decides to sacrifice himself. Although that is a very sad scene, like that scene does make me tear up. The saddest scenes in the movie to me are when the giant is trying to like stay on this path and trying to choose, who he wants to be, as they say, and where he isn't able to do it, where he sort of snaps back to himself after going into like weapon mode and sort of seeing the consequences of what he's done, and like the possibility that he might have hurt Hogarth, and like his genuine pain at the thought. Like that's the saddest stuff to me, is that this sort of complete existential breakdown of the self, as being experienced by a 50-foot tall Vin Diesel metal man.
This basically the big thing that you can take away from what Jackson was saying, and like I was kind of trying to place it into simpler terms as you were saying it, just kind of rationalizing it against what my understanding of the movie is this ends up not being so much of a movie with themes of death, but more of a movie with themes around death. That's why it's really hard for us to specifically be like, well, a deer died here, and, it's representative of how this works going forward and whatnot. It's not so much about that. It's much more of a learning experience of, like, it is a weird way to teach children about what death is, and it's not just the death of Mufasa. It's, choices have consequences. The consequence sometimes is death. Death is not bad, but to kill is. And it's a really interesting kind of complex idea to discuss in such a condensed format like a podcast. Like a lot of the themes and metaphors within the movie do end up being a little bit more visual, and a lot of the humanization of the robot ends up being a little bit more visual. So it does become tricky to accurately explain how this movie handles itself.
I think the biggest praise that I can give this movie is that it has the kind of themes, it has the kind of ideas where any explanation we can give of them is going to be less effective than just watching the thing, than just watching the movie itself. Like they have their ideas, and they explain them perfectly, not just in the dialogue of the characters, but in like the structure of the plot and how the story moves and the way like scenes unfolds, and just like the composition. It's just a fucking great movie. It's just you make a work of art to try and communicate an idea, and sometimes you just communicate it so clearly that something like this podcast maybe feels a little redundant trying to explain it again.
I mean that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to take something that is so clearly on the surface of this movie and dive deeper into it when there's not really much else to dive into. It is your actions, or who you were created to be, don't mean who you are. You can be what you want to be. I am not a gun is what the movie is, and there's nothing more that we can say that would add to that. There's nothing that we can really convey that the movie doesn't convey better.
I will say one thing, that the Iron Giant, like, and this might be just like a realization that I'm having about myself, is that the Iron Giant is the kind of movie where the themes are not like super intellectually complex, and that they're hard to understand or hard to parse out in any way, or that it's tackling a lot of sort of big ideas, but it does have ideas. And what I think the thing about the Iron Giant and what makes it work so well as a movie is that the themes are emotionally complex, where again you're wrangling with characters trying, and like a character in particular, like trying to like live a good life and going against his very nature, like what he was built to do, his own role in this world, and what he's capable of, and trying to sort of his literal programming, and like trying to be more than that, and like ultimately succeeding in some ways but failing in others. Like, he's still the Iron Giant still ends up killing a lot of people in this movie, and that is and I mean, again, I'm just sort of repeating myself here, but like I said, those are the saddest scenes to me, when he has these moments of realizing what he's done, and that the movie is making using this giant robot military action to talk about choice and consequence in a really straightforward but effective way is what makes the movie so emotionally heart-wrenching. It's what makes the movie give you such a kick, because even though you don't just understand what it's saying, you really, really feel it.
Yeah, I mean, honest to God, like, if you've seen this movie, you know exactly what we're talking about. If you haven't, then we've described it piss poorly, and you just need to go watch it and actually understand what we're talking about. Because Jackson did put it best in that this is emotionally thematic, not so much literally thematic. You're going to feel much more of it in a complex, hard to talk about way than an actual, like, well, this happened here, which is indicative of change type of thing. It is something that you will wrestle with yourself, not something that we can help you through, if that makes any sense. So I think the one thing that we will talk about, though, and I think the one thing that we can kind of debate and take away from this is the ending of the movie culminates with famous and rightfully so line, "You stay, I go, no following," as the Iron Giant blasts off into space to sacrifice himself on a nuke that is heading for the town.
By the way, that line is so fucking good that, like, when they have it set up as kind of a joke earlier and, like, plant the idea, like, I still kind of tear up just thinking about it in, like, that completely not sad context.
It's so good. It's such a great line. There's just so much. This film is brilliantly written. But so he sacrifices himself and blows up, and it was established earlier on after he is hit by a train and kind of falls apart a little bit. Like, some of his arms fall off, he loses a couple bolts and whatnot, is that he can pull himself back together. And so he goes back to the barn and pulls himself back together. And after this nuke hits, you're not thinking about that. This character got nuked. This was set up way earlier on in the movie. You're not thinking, oh, he's coming back. But sure enough, at the final scene, we get the jaw bolt that we see earlier start to roll towards the window like it's going to go reset himself. And the final shot is of the Iron Giant on an iceberg in Greenland or something like that. And he gives just the stupid puppy dog grin, and you get a little happy sad, and the movie ends. So our question from that we were kind of talking about is mainly in relation to movies we were talking about last week, specifically Infinity War. So I'm going to throw a second spoiler warning here in case you haven't seen Infinity War yet. We're going to kind of do a quick little bit of a discussion about that in comparison to the Iron Giants.
Chances are you've been spoiled by memes on your Facebook or Twitter page already.
Yeah, you know.
But just in case.
Yeah. If you've somehow managed to not get spoiled, congratulations. You are a god amongst men. But yeah, so last week we complained about the fact that we knew that everyone who dies in Infinity War is coming back. And we're kind of like, it feels like it lessens some of the impact. But the resurrection of the Iron Giant in this is not the same in our eyes. And we were kind of, in our pre-discussion, debating why this moment works and why it doesn't really lessen any of the themes or impacts or ideas of the movie when something like Infinity War or another movie that might have a resurrection of a character could theoretically weaken it?
I think it's an interesting question just because I can totally see a cut of this movie without that sort of last like hope shot that coming together working in a really powerful way for me. And this movie affected me quite differently on my most recent viewing than it has on previous ones. Even just the idea that Hogarth is going to keep that jaw bolt, like if it had ended there, like that still has a bit of an emotional kick to it. So the fact that it ends up coming together, if not for a resurrection, then just like a repair, however you want to frame it. I think it speaks volumes that my gut reaction wasn't like feeling cheated, like, oh, like the dumb kids movie is, bringing the silly giant back because he can't actually have consequences. And I think there's a couple of important distinctions from Infinity War that make this land a little better. It's not a hard calculus for whether or not a resurrection will undo the impact of a particular death may have. So, in this movie, the giant sacrificing himself is just the ultimate expression of that theme of him choosing to be Superman over Atomo, over the villain, over the gun. And it's interesting that Superman is the point of comparison. He's like for the period piece setting, it seems like a pretty clear reason to use him just because he would have been the most popular comic book character at the time, in a way that he kind of isn't now. But what's interesting about Superman is that that's sort of the complaint that people have about him, and that's sort of what sets him apart from a lot of the other heroes, is that Superman is able to make the sacrifice play without actually sacrificing anything because he's so powerful, or at least culturally understood to be powerful and invincible. So it's interesting that, this ends with the giant making a sacrifice that doesn't end in his death, considering that Superman is put in that position where maybe he's willing to sacrifice himself but is unable to, or like doesn't have to. And I think that's sort of an interesting, I don't know what really to make of that, so I'm gonna kind of leave that there for now. But regardless, in like context, what you mentioned about the train and the extent of the repairs being seen earlier, I think that's a good point, because with the train, the level of damage that is going to happen from a nuke versus being hit by a train is just so much greater, in that we have plenty of reason to believe, even if we do remember the giant putting himself together, that we have reason to believe that the nuke would be too much, that the nuke might just completely incinerate him. And so I'm not bothered at all by like the logic of him surviving the nuke, because that's less important than whether it feels emotionally right, whether it feels thematically right. And it does, because the giant, again, you stay, I go, no following. The giant knows what he's doing, or at least thinks that there is the chance that he will die, because otherwise there is no point of making the giant grapple with his own mortality. So that all tracks really well. And so by having him come together, does that undo any of that? Well, I mean, he's still chosen to be a hero. He's still chosen to be a good guy. He's still chosen to, put others before himself. And the fact that he ends up coming back together, you can argue, maybe cheapens it a little, but I don't think it does to the extent where rewatching the sacrifice scene robs it of its emotional punch, because it doesn't. I still cry. And also, there's just the fact of the purpose of having it end with the smile, the purpose of having it end on kind of this hope spot, because this isn't like a multi-billion-dollar franchise where we have to tease a sequel. I mean, it's just there to provide some levity and make us feel good that this good boy, the giant, is still has a chance of coming back together again. And that feels a lot more innocent of an artistic decision to me than calculating what members of your cast would be convenient in a business sense or in a meta sense, and then leaving those characters alive, and then killing all the other ones for no apparent thematic reason at all, other than just to shock people and generate a lot of buzz. I guess the difference between having the giant put himself together versus having all the Avengers come back after Thanos snaps them out of existence is that one feels like a choice made to like genuinely delight people, and the other one feels like a cynical marketing like meta plan building thing.
I'm gonna actually focus on like a single word that you used in your theory as to why it doesn't feel as bad, and it's the smile, because it's not. The smile really kind of puts a cap on it. It's not if it was kind of setting up for a sequel, you might have it just kind of come back together or whatnot. You see like the pieces moving and everything like that. But when it ends on just that stupid, goofy grin, it feels like it's closing. It doesn't feel like, oh, is he going to come back to be okay and everything? Is everything going to be the way it was? No, you know exactly. He's going to be fine. We end with him smiling at the camera in just a happy, pleasant way, and it just makes you feel good and warm inside. It doesn't feel like they're trying to establish the Iron Giant cinematic universe. It's just happy for the sake of being happy.
This is the kind of positive note that we as a death podcast don't often get to end on, so I think we should take this opportunity.
We're not known for this, let me tell you that.
Thank you so much for listening, folks. If you want to catch us on Twitter, make sure you follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. We will tweet updates and memes and jokes and other great things for you to follow and enjoy. But in the meantime, if you want to hear more from us individually, you can follow me on Twitter at JacksonJKeller. I tweeted about Dragon Ball a lot recently, so that is not related to the Iron Giant at all, really. But maybe some of you will enjoy that.
I mean, it kind of is. You did point out that with the addition of the signature edition scene that was cut, it kind of becomes reminiscent of the Saiyans.
Oh, yes! This is actually extremely important because the Iron Giant is just Goku. They're both bloodthirsty people robots that come from a violent race meant only to destroy, like encoded into their programming in their DNA. They take a bump on the head, and they end up kind of dumb because of it, childlike and simple, but they end up becoming such good boys who end up assisting in the protection of all. So, the Iron Giant and Goku are good boys, and you can't take them away from me.
If you have no idea what we're talking about, I will post a link in the description of the video so you guys can watch it, because it's a scene that I actually didn't know about until very recently, and it's a wild scene for the movie. Like, I understand why it was cut. It's interesting, but I get it. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Sean_McKinda. You can also check out my website, isortof.com. I've got a bunch of stuff over there. I'm planning on doing more with it, but you can find my Twitch stream. You can find some of my various small writing things that I've done, as well as some terrible, terrible other ideas that I've had that I leave up there as a badge of shame.
Follow Sean's shame. Follow it. As always, thank you to Lords of the Highway for the use of their song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. Go listen to them and support them because, we all gotta support each other in this world, just like the Iron Giant. Also, thank you once again to 25yearslatersite.com for hosting us as part of your lovely community of film and media experts. They've been gathering a lot more content for all sorts of film, but if you are a David Lynch fan in particular, you should go check them out because there's lots of great content about Twin Peaks and David Lynch's other films. Yeah, so do that. Support, so much support, so much love and support here on this positive podcast that doesn't at all take long, depressing tangents at the very end of episodes.
No, we're known for our positive endings, and I think we're going to get back into that next week, too. I think it's going to be another real positive one.
Yes, stick around next week to kind of fill the gap that we have in movie releases. We're going to be talking about one of my favorites, Inception, and sort of the interesting ways that death is and is not presented in that film. So look forward to that.
And just a quick hand to Jackson for his first ever closing of the podcast. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Why, thank you. I tried my best. I hope I didn't forget anyone. Mom, I love you. Thanks, Mom, for supporting me.
And the Academy, absolutely the Academy. So, bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go